Who are you supposed to be?
Captain America.
I beg your pardon?
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. This week was the finale of Loki. You and I have not watched it yet, but I'm excited.
we were busy watching a movie that came out 10 years ago, almost to the day that we saw it.
Yeah. This week we are talking about Captain America, the First Avenger, a movie that chronologically takes place first in all of the MCU. Chronological order means a lot to us because it gives you the opportunity to observe and analyze from the beginning
and to apparently ask questions like, wait, is that the Tesseract?
Right.
Wait, where is it supposed to be?
Where's it in this time? Wait, what? Isn't it still what?
Why isn't it in Asgard? What's happening?
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about these questions and more as we analyze Steve Rogers, otherwise known as Captain America. This is the Superman of the Marvel Universe. This is a character who is the Dudley Do-Right, incredibly powerful, virtually indestructible, with a moral compass that cannot be shaken. Drea, have you ever really held much interest in Captain America?
No, until now.
Okay.
Which is really interesting. I had a very transformative experience watching this movie in 2021. Again, 10 years after it first came out. Mm-hmm. When this movie came out, I felt interested in Captain America. I wanted the full story. I wanted to see how he fit in with the full narrative, the other Avengers, the building of these arcs. Like, that felt important to me. Mm-hmm. But the character himself, I have always been, up to this point, pretty bored by him. Mm-hmm. And to be quite honest, I felt almost a sense of, I don't know, detachment or misunderstanding. I didn't quite understand this fervent connection with patriotism.
Yeah.
And I would even say, especially in the last few years, when I think about Captain America, I've aligned him almost inappropriately, almost to an extreme level, mm-hmm. with nationalism. I've sort of aligned him with this sense of blind devotion to the USA.
Yeah.
And we can definitely talk more about that. But what I do want to say about that is I've adjusted my perspective of him after watching this film again. Mm-hmm. I have, I think, just painted him with a really broad stroke. You know, this is someone who just wears red, white, and blue and is just blindly defending the country and just seems too ideal and not realistic.
It's sort of the equivalent of what today is called virtue signaling. It's this idea of someone who so fervently decries this or that and stands up for this and that and makes themselves known as a 100% ally. Meanwhile, somewhere under the surface,
it's more of a performance.
Yeah. So the idea, I could easily see where you would equate Captain America with those sort of false patriots of today, but I actually, I think you are right to say that your opinion has changed, especially after having seen the movie again. Captain America, Steve Rogers genuinely is this guy. He's genuinely this patriotic, and I think he proves it not just in this film, but as the MCU goes forward, and we'll certainly talk about that. He's a character who has, even in the comics, become disenchanted with America, with the United States, with the way the government has changed, with the way that the people have changed. He is a man who believes that the country he loved is different, not necessarily worse, but certainly not better. And he doesn't fully feel like he belongs in the time that he is in. And of course, a lot of this has to do with the fact that he was literally created in 1941. The same year this movie takes place. It's right there during World War II that you create this character that presents as America coming in to save the day and defeat the Nazis and Hydra. Interestingly, I compared him to DC's Superman. And I'm sure a bunch of listeners started yelling at me instantly.
Well, why? Why is he the equivalent of Superman? I see where you're going with the almost an infinite amount of strength and invincibility. He is by far one of the strongest. Yeah. Avengers.
Well, and it's just the unshakable moral compass. If you were to use, let's say, Dungeons and Dragons terms, in the DC, I would say Superman is like the ultimate paladin. He is there for God, for country, for the people. He believes in the world as a whole. He is a very positive person, and yet has the strength of all the gods in the universe to cast divine smite on whomever, but never will. He doesn't want to go that next step to kill or whatever. I think Steve Rogers is the same way, although Steve has never really had any sort of rule against killing. He understands that he is a soldier. He is not a stranger to using a gun. It's not his first choice of weapon. It's not something that he would want to do. He even says in this film that when asked if he wants to kill Nazis, he comes right out and says, "I don't want to kill anyone, but I don't like bullies." And so I think that there is a difference between Superman and Captain America. Captain America is that ultimate paladin, but on the other hand, he is more relatable to me than Superman. He is someone who may not get physically damaged all that much, but is emotionally damaged regularly. And so I think that brings a little bit more realism to the character, or at least a little more interest to the character. And we get to see some of that trauma happen right here. I mean, he basically grew up a sickly kid who was bullied every day of his life, learned to not only take it, but stand up for himself. Of course, that would inevitably mean more beatdowns. He stood up for other people, which would inevitably mean more beatdowns, and ultimately made the friend of Bucky Barnes, who would join the army and would sort of want to follow in his footsteps. He desperately tries, fraudulently, to get into the United States Army.
Yeah, it's interesting because he is willing to bend the rules.
100%.
He's lied on his, I'm going to call them applications. They're not.
Sure.
Yeah? Okay.
Sure.
So there is a little bit of history here that's important too, that at the time, this is, like you said, 41, 42, there is a tremendous amount of recruitment for young soldiers to participate in the war. And there is this, call to action, and he lies on his applications in order to serve his country.
Yeah.
He wants to be on the front lines. And he's willing to bend the rules to get there, which is an interesting facet of his personality.
But there are certain rules, like, to some extent, again, to use that sort of D&D, he's not the chaotic neutral. He's not all for himself. He's also not, I guess he would be, maybe if I'm using it correctly, it'd be like the chaotic good, he would be willing to bend that rule if it meant the betterment of the world around him. And, yeah, you're right. He's willing to lie. He's willing to say that he's someone he isn't. He's willing to say he's from somewhere he isn't. He's willing to lie about his age, his stature, in order to get into the military. And this attracts the attention of a very particular doctor, in this place, played by whom, Drea?
The Tooch.
Played by the Tooch. As we're watching this film, Drea says, "Is that the Tooch?"
I forgot that Stanley Tucci was in this movie, in the MCU at all.
Oh, really?
So it's nice to see him as a reminder of this character,
yeah,
who is definitely not malevolent or ill-intentioned. There's something there, the undertone of this film. So I'd say that the main themes, of course, include self-identity and values, and yes, a level of patriotism and wanting to be purposeful, wanting to have a place in a really important fight. Mm-hmm. In this case, the fight against Nazis. Mm-hmm. The other themes here, I'd say, have a lot to do with science. There are scientists who are using their intellect and their curiosity and their power for very nefarious things. Yeah. And there are other scientists that are utilizing those very same attributes to advance society, mm-hmm. in good ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's another aspect of this film that I didn't pay attention to until this rewatch. Yeah. It's such an important part. It's one of the fundamental themes here, because I think that's the other lesson to talk about. What happens when you have all of this, in this case, supernatural and scientific advancements. Mm-hmm. How do you use these powers to overcome something that's happening that's really terrible, which in this case is the, erasure of communities. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really interesting backdrop to the main story. Yeah. It's, again, if you have strengths, if you have attributes, if you have access, if you have resources, how are you going to use those things? So another really good lesson. I also noticed in this rewatch the color and kind of use of that 30s, 40s film noir. I really liked it. You see, of course, all the styles mm-hmm. and design and outfits that we're familiar with from the 30s and 40s. But then you also see in this film the bright greens, mm-hmm. the blues, the different color tones that tell you, you're in a science fiction film noir kind of bent reality. This is not happening in your dimension. This is happening in a different one. This is a what if, a Marvel's what if. They do it really well. So I really enjoy just the aesthetics of that. Yeah. You mentioned The Rocketeer, it had that element of, it's back in time, but it's in the future. It's this sort of sci-fi alternate reality. Well, there's no coincidence that the director of The Rocketeer, Joe Johnston, is the director of Captain America, mm-hmm. the First Avenger. And he carries with him that same amount of
fun, but also brings the movie up a notch. Like the Rocketeer is basically just a straightforward bubblegum and popcorn fun movie, sort of reminiscent of the serials. And Captain America is very much grounded in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where it's definitely taking place on Earth during a real time where there are real consequences and real villains who can do really bad things. And so it still has the same fun, but you're right, it looks different. It looks more serious. It's got more weight. Let's talk about why Abraham Erskine, the doctor played by Stanley Tucci, ultimately chooses Steve Rogers for this super soldier project. What is it from your perspective, Drea, that would attract you to a character like this? And I've got a little bit of audio that actually defines Erskine's reasoning. But tell me, from your perspective, why is a person like this perfect for a project like Captain America?
Why is Steven Rogers perfect?
Yeah.
My sense is that he carries some prominent attributes that this scientist is looking for above and beyond physical characteristics. So in other words, we already know that the super serum is going to make the weak person strong. It's going to make somebody who's small much bigger. So we're not looking for somebody who's already big and muscular and is going to have that physical presence. My sense is it's specifically also not the person who is nationalistic.
Yeah.
Which again kind of goes back to my realizing that I had kind of ignored Captain America's story because I had misattributed him as somebody who is just purely nationalistic and just about the ideology without much more there. So when I say that, I mean, there's even a character, and I don't even remember his name, but there are other soldiers that the Tooch could have picked for the super serum. And I think at first blush, they seem right because they are eager to fight.
Yeah.
They are carrying kind of the weight psychologically of patriotism. But again, it has this sense of superiority to it without much justification. What does it mean for you to be proud of serving your country? Is it simply to enact being a bully? Is it simply to feel and believe in your superiority to other groups, other countries, other nations? That is not what this mission is about. And I think that Steve Rogers happens to carry those characteristics of responsibility to one's ideals. And it's just like you said, that moral compass. It's really not so much about the nation state. It's not so much about being the best in the world. It's actually about the ability to uphold justice. And I think I mentioned the word responsibility. I'm not sure if I have yet, but he is a responsible steward.
Yeah.
And he carries that personality. There's actually 4 sub like personality traits that are associated with this kind of responsibility. One is that he's an asserter. He feels absolutely responsible for enforcing rules and for standing up for truth and justice. The second is a peace seeker. So he feels, again, responsible for promoting fairness, harmony, justice, this sense of we should end wars, not make them.
Yeah.
He's a questioner. So he's looking for dangers in life. He's looking to protect others. He's seeking out where threats are. And then finally, an adventurer, somebody who is just keying in to experiences of adventure and both social, personal, and kind of like political even experiences that are gonna help him feel and actualize this sense of responsibility and for making others happy. That's actually really complex. And I think Steve Rogers carries these attributes. And it's probably just that one scene where he jumps on the grenade to protect others that tells us this is our guy. He's willing to sacrifice his life in order for others to have the very things I mentioned: justice, fairness, peace, an end to the violence. He's willing to put himself in the front lines for that.
Yeah. So the moment that you're referencing, Colonel Phillips, played by Tommy Lee Jones, is trying to prove that his selection of Hodge is the better selection for this super soldier project, and Erskine insists that Rogers is the right person, that this weakling with the huge heart of a lion is the right person. Phillips removes a grenade from a box in the back of a truck, pulls the pin, and tosses it out into the middle of the recruits there at basic training. And all of the recruits, save one, scatter and hide, including Hodge, which completely negates Colonel Phillips' assertion that he would be the perfect man for this job. And as you said, Steve Rogers is the one that jumps on the grenade and tells everyone to get back. And of course, it's a dummy grenade. It does not blow up, but it proves Erskine's point. I do have a little bit of audio here I want to play, and I think it sums up well everything that you just said. So let's take a listen.
The serum amplifies everything that is inside. So good becomes great. Bad becomes worse.
Makes skinny men skinnier. Asthmatics asthmaticer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it should have been.
Yeah.
But
right.
okay.
Ugly men uglier. Pretty men prettier.
I'm curious to get your perspective about this transformation, because you're quite familiar with
Transforming
Marvel.
my own body to
With getting
this
muscular.
godlike physique.
No. You're more familiar with Marvel origin stories and the alignment to comics. And I think this is a very similar transformation and origin story that we see in the comics. But I'm curious to hear from you how you feel about this, this transformation in particular.
The fact that everything about him was made perfect except the fact that he stayed a blonde and not became a redhead. No? Oh, that was just me? Okay.
Well, he would have needed that recessive gene or whatever.
Okay. Scientists.
So there are a couple of questions I do want to ask you. The first one is, given your knowledge of Captain America's origin story and how this looks in the comics, this is pretty similar, right? There's a lot of alignment there, at least from what I know.
Yeah, in the original comics, he was given a series of injections, although that was retconned later. And it made him this super strong man with all the stamina and endurance he could possibly need to be Captain America. Yes.
And again, it isn't just that he's more muscular and he's larger in stature, but he can withstand and tolerate a lot of physical injury.
Yeah.
He's nearly invincible. I think he can be killed.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
He's very, very tolerant. His physical stature, his body is very tolerant.
But his reflexes are also heightened. So similar to Spider-Man, while he doesn't have a spider sense, just try catching him. If you shoot him, inevitably his reflexes will kick in, and he will be able to block that bullet with his shield. if he wanted. And I think, if I remember correctly, in the original, I think he even became like smarter. So he was able to like,
interesting.
I think everything about him became this Ubermensch type character.
Okay, so I'm also struggling a little bit with this idea that his body changes. So on the one hand, I understand that in order to fulfill this role as Captain America, he has to fit that part quite physically. And yet I struggle with this concept of body image. Like, couldn't he have done all these things if this is all a supernatural kind of superhero power? What are your feelings behind the physical transformation? And I think what I just really am trying to articulate is this concept that in order to be the perfect soldier, you have to have the body of a superhero. And that wasn't his body. So I guess I just want to explore that sense of body transformation. Is this telling a helpful story that sometimes you feel a certain way in your body, but your body doesn't represent who you are inside? And so there could be something helpful in that narrative. Or should we be a little bit more challenging here and say, yeah, well, you don't need to look like a god in order to be actualize these ideas and these values that he has.
So you're suggesting that in some way, the look of Captain America post serum, the actual Captain America character, is in some way propaganda for steroid use.
That's a simplified way of saying it. But yes, I think I'm uncomfortable with this concept of, let me just put it this way.
Yeah.
People didn't really like him.
Sure.
Peggy was probably, the Tooch and Peggy saw in him really, really positive things, right?
Okay, yeah.
But most people didn't like him. He was invisible. He was really nothing.
He was annoying to them.
Yeah, and he didn't earn people's interest and respect until he looked like this.
Well, I think the problem is the character was created at a time, and you can't deny the fact that he's a superhero. So just graphically in the comics, he's going to have to become a Superman. He's going to have to become big and strong. He's also a physical representation for what America meant and stood for in 1941. So he's going to be a strong character. You're not going to want a weakling running around punching Nazis. From a realistic point of view, I have no problem with him becoming this super character, because ultimately 90 pounds is 90 pounds. If a guy who is barely 100 pounds is punching you in the face, I don't care what the super serum did to your emotional and intelligence levels. It still doesn't pack the wallop that it does if suddenly you have become a 230 pound
he has to
super fighter.
He has to become a weapon.
Yes,
is what you're saying.
Yes, he has to become the human tank. And so I believe that by doing so, by making the muscles stronger, and in the film, certainly, and in most incarnations of the comics, I don't know if it really did that much to his personality and intelligence and whatever. It simply gives Steve the tools that he has always needed to succeed beyond those he already had. So it's like he had the tools in the toolbox. He just didn't have all the tools he needed to build his house. And now he has all those tools, and he is using them to perfection as Captain America.
And my criticism isn't really huge here. I'm not saying, I think
you're onto something. I think you're onto something, though. I think the fact that people might look at this and say, I need to become a 230 pound behemoth in order to do good in the world. Meanwhile, Erskine makes the point that the serum will not do that. The physique will not do that. We could have given this serum to Hodge, but Hodge would have become the wrong person for this. It ultimately doesn't matter what you look like. It is what's inside that makes you the perfect candidate.
And I love that part of the story. And again, I think that's actually what helped me gain more respect for this character, generally speaking, because I got sort of, I don't know, swept away or trapped in this concept of like, he has all of those features as Captain America that are so ideal and so ingrained in our community, in our kind of the cultural sense of what we should consider ideal, that I just kind of wanted to push away from that. It just seemed too stereotypical.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I would have loved a scene that had a quiet moment with Steve Rogers looking in the mirror at himself, barely clothed, just considering, like, this is my body now. I'm half joking, but I'm also like, where did that happen where he is processing this physical transformation?
But we've also seen that sort of moment in other movies and other, not Marvel movies specifically, but other Marvel characters. Just about any time we've seen an origin story of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, we've seen that the nerd go to muscular and him, be wowed by himself in the mirror. Now, you're not necessarily asking for the wow factor. What you're asking for is the introspection, the what does this mean for me?
Yes. How does this actualize my really strong, relevant values, and how does it also distract me?
Yeah.
This is speaking from his own self-talk.
Yeah.
And, we don't have to spend this much time on Captain America's body. But again, I think I just want to involve people in this concept of he could have a dad bod. He could have a different, like a different kind of body. It kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
This is about his psychology underneath. That's what's really important.
I think it matters in a time of war. I don't think it matters, if he were to become president of the United States. I don't think, but again, if he's going to be leading the Howling Commandos behind enemy lines, we probably want him to be physically fit. What I really think is interesting about this character in this movie, and this is what I love about what they did. So he becomes, because he is the only person to successfully take this serum and become this super soldier, and because Erskine is killed without having written everything down. So it's a very incomplete set of notes. And I think this is by design. He didn't want you to just be able to recreate this. Erskine is killed, meaning Steve is the only person who will successfully undergo this transformation. And so they decide that he needs to become a mascot for the United States. He begins to sell war bonds town to town on stage with a bunch of dancers. It is not at all what he had in mind. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, though, he does buy in. He's nervous about it at first, but he likes it. He likes the attention, but he also feels like he's doing something. He feels like selling war bonds to America is a good thing regardless, despite the fact that it's not what he initially signed on for. It's not what he wanted to do. I think that he has convinced himself that it's a good thing. Then you've got the person who writes him back onto True North on his compass, Peggy Carter. Peggy tells him, look, this isn't what you were made for. This isn't what Erskine would have wanted for you. This isn't what you want for you. And he decides to go against orders. He is not going to continue his mission as the mascot of the United States. He is going to actually go behind enemy lines, and he is going to rescue these POWs that he knows will inevitably die if the colonel has his way and continues the mission the way that he has planned. He goes behind enemy lines by himself, and he rescues these people who ultimately, afterward, decide to become his team, and they become the Howling Commandos. Probably the most prominent of which would be Dum Dum Dugan.
Who?
Dum Dum Dugan.
Okay. Who's that?
He's the guy that you claimed that definitely isn't his hair, and he's been made up with,
He looked like he was wearing so much makeup and like hair, prosthetics, all that. He looked really out of place, to be honest.
Played by Neil McDonough, who's a fantastic actor. You've seen him in a million things, but you've probably never seen him look like Dum Dum Dugan before.
He isn't a redhead because they did something to him to make him look that way. And I did look it up in the comics. Mm-hmm.
He looks just like him.
He does. This is a live action version of this character, so it's good, I guess.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing about the Howling Commandos, especially as portrayed in this film, they're not given a whole lot to do. They basically go on a series of missions with Cap, but we don't get to really see the adventures of Captain America and the Howling Commandos. But it's a very diverse group. You've got Jim Morita, played by Kenneth Choi. You've got Fallsworth, J.J. Field. You've got Dernier, I think. I mean, he's
the French guy.
Yeah. Bruno Ricci. You've got Derek Luke as Gabe Jones. So you've got a very diverse worldly view, and it's a perfect. This is what the world should be. It should be all of us working together alongside Captain America, who ironically literally is the Ubermensch that Hitler wanted. The giant 6'3",
blue-eyed
230-pound blue-eyed white man.
Yeah, and that honestly is what distracted me.
Yeah,
and you named all the reasons why this story is so important. It isn't about the superiority of the U.S. That's not what this story is about. Mm-hmm. It's about identifying oppression and threats, the very ones that actually endanger diversity, inclusion, fairness. Mm-hmm. And you've got people who are signed on to this mission in really personal ways.
Yeah.
Not because they want the glory and they want simply the feeling of what I'm guessing patriotism is about, which is just that, again, just that sense of I'm right, you're wrong kind of idea. That's absolutely not what this is about.
Yeah.
And I think I've gained just a lot of respect for this story because I'm readjusting the way that I think about it. And I like Captain America so much more.
Yeah. And I think part of that too, in terms of the physical appearance, I think part of it, whether consciously or not, it was 1941. It was Jack Kirby essentially giving Hitler exactly what he wanted, but punching him in the face with it. Like, you're right. This is the ultimate man, and he's against you, kind of thing. And I don't know if that's true, but it does seem ironic that the one thing that Hitler really wanted the world to look like is his ultimate villain, his nemesis. And so, let's talk about some of our supporting characters. Let's talk about Peggy Carter. We're introduced to her in this film. She's an incredibly strong female character. She is an agent with the British intelligence services. She is not well respected amongst the American recruits necessarily. Hodge in particular, we see sort of attempt to berate her when she's trying to be serious in front of the group. And yet she might be the strongest character in the movie, because even when Steve Rogers is down, she's the one who picks him up. She's the protagonist. She's the one that moves the story forward. Talk a little bit about Peggy.
She's really delightful. And I think that there is, again, the important moments where she identifies the good in Steve Rogers before he becomes Captain America. And I think that's such an important aspect of this arc, that she already likes him. She sees attributes in him that others don't notice because they're so focused on his body and his size. She is very, I think that she's very wholesome and endearing, and yet knows that she also is having to subvert expectations and stereotypes herself.
Yeah.
To be able to advance to her level in the war, in the position that she's in, to be a leader, there's this combination of having to be kind of just like one of the boys, so to speak, but also to harness and embody her femininity. And that complexity is really there. I think they did a great job with this character. But again, I think what's really important is that she connects with Steve Rogers in a very authentic way.
Speaking of very authentic way of connecting with Steve Rogers, one piece of trivia that I found on IMDb, but then also confirmed when I found a couple of interviews with her at the time, Haley Atwell, who played Peggy Carter, surprisingly touching Chris Evans' chest as he emerged from the pod upon turning into Captain America, was very much improvised. And the surprise on her face is genuine, as she admitted in interviews that she was taken by Chris's physique and nearly broke character and ruined the take that made it into the film as a result.
It actually looks really genuine, that moment.
It is very genuine.
Yeah.
So not only does Peggy connect with Steve Rogers she definitely connects with Captain America afterward, and becomes his love interest. Whether that is ethically correct or not, I will leave to you, the audience. But his superior officer, is romantically involved with Chris, or with Steve. Not throughout, like, we don't see it. We just understand that there's a connection there, and there's a promise of a date.
And there's a kiss before he is
Yeah.
sent into onto the plane.
Yes.
That the Red Skull is piloting. I mean, we've got to talk about the Red Skull.
Let's talk about the Red Skull. This is the ultimate nemesis for Captain America. Let's talk about this character who has also undergone a super soldier serum. He has also been transformed, and similar to what Erskine said, it will make bad men worse. And we see that it does, not just emotionally and intellectually. It is basically sort of driven this man mad, but not in a it's sort of he's mad for power.
Yeah. It's interesting because the serum for the Red Skull amplifies his belief, his grandiosity, his belief in his superiority, to the degree that Hydra ditches the Nazis. Like, the Nazis become, like, they're not extreme enough for us. We're 2 notches into the direction of, like, we need to be even more oppressive. Mm-hmm. And he just becomes this infallible villain. He's just, in terms of, like, how do we overcome this?
Yeah.
And he has all the makings of a good villain, I think, in this setting. You've got the strong accent, the leather gloves, the uniform. He's
the literal red skull for a head.
He's great.
Yeah. Well, so Johann Schmidt basically used an earlier version of Erskine's exact same formula, and it did this to him. So Erskine has seen what it means to give the serum to the wrong person. And that's why he's so adamant about finding the right person in Steve Rogers. Otherwise, you could become another Johann Schmidt, who is known to his colleagues as the Red Skull, primarily because his head is a red skull. And he wears a mask, a prosthetic, in order to make himself look less red scully. And he has found the Tesseract, and he is using the power of the Tesseract in order to fuel a new set of sort of futuristic, futuristic weapons. He's doing that with the help of another brilliant scientist, Dr. Zola, played by Toby Jones. That name especially will mean something in a little while. We can't talk about it yet.
Okay.
So he is using this power to create super weapons because even he doesn't want to follow in the footsteps of Hitler. He wants to overthrow Hitler. He wants to overthrow the whole world. He wants to basically dominate everything. Is there much more to his psychology than that? Can we blame what he is now on the serum, or is this something that we could see in a real person today?
Well, I certainly think this is, again, an amplification of his greed and grandiosity, and it just gets worse and worse. And again, it's almost a counterpart to Captain America. This is the other side of the, in this case, the counter values that we need to think about strongly. If you weaponize these technologies, you could end up facing a tremendous threat, which is, again, the erasure and oppression of many communities. It's really interesting because we don't hear the Red Skull, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't hear him articulate this huge plan. Like if this were a DC movie, you'd get this long monologue about what he's going to do with this technology.
Well,
step by step.
There is no James Bondian villain plan per se. You do get pieces of it throughout. When Zola initially harnesses the power, he says that it's going to change the world. So you certainly get the idea that he has global impact in mind. Then later, when the Nazi commanders who have been sent by Hitler to follow up on Hydra's mission, he ends up killing them and then tells Zola, come on, we always knew that this was going to happen eventually. Like, so you know that he has always known that he would follow orders just long enough to get what he needed, and then he would start to take over. And so we get little pieces. And then as he's introduced to Steve Rogers, he makes it clear that he was at one time a test subject of Erskine. And, now they have both become supermen, and this is what you can be. And, he does the whole Vader, like, together we could rule the world sort of. But yeah, you're right. There isn't really a single monologue, but maybe brilliantly, we get his plan through tiny little moments.
Right. And I think that just this concept that they were supporting the Nazis and aligning with and even supplying the Nazis with some weapons, and at some point broke that alliance to do more extreme, to take more extreme action, to kind of form their own ideals and missions, is a huge part of this narrative too, right? Like, in a way, all the things that I was worried about with Captain America, this concern that he would be favoring, or he would be all about in-group favoritism and out-group evaluation, this concept of everyone has to be like me.
Yeah.
That's what the enemy is doing. That's exactly what we're seeing, what we're identifying in Red Skull. And there, I think, those are the nuances that had me step back and realize, like, oh, that's what really they're trying to tell us, is like, when you have these feelings, these in-group superior feelings, this lack of this, unwillingness to embrace diversity and justice and an openness to others, this is what you end up with. This is a true villain. This is the true enemy. This is really, really dangerous. Of course, it's happening on a scale that's just extremely supernatural and very out there, especially in the final scenes. But I think that's what this comparison is trying to do, with the sense of, can you carry beliefs and values that protect your identity, that protect your community, and also understand these concepts about inclusion, these concepts about embracing the other, and not wanting to destroy and be destructive.
Yeah. Could I ask a little bit about Bucky? Because this is a character that changes immensely from his original incarnation in the comics. In that original version of Captain America, Bucky was actually a teenager and was essentially the mascot of the fort where he was getting his basic training. In this particular incarnation of Bucky, and admittedly, I've not read too much, including Bucky, a couple of the more sort of seminal comics, but I'm not super familiar. I was never a real big fan of the sidekicks for superheroes.
Yeah.
I mean, Robin is probably the furthest I would go. But this idea of every superhero needing a teenage sidekick was a little much for me. So I didn't really ever read a lot about Bucky, but he was the teenage kid who learned Cap's secret identity and ultimately agreed to not tell the world. He blackmailed him. He agreed to not tell the world if he could become Cap's sidekick.
What a weird way to start that friendship.
Right? Yeah. So that happened. And in this version, Bucky is a character that Steve very much looks up to. He might be a little older. He's a sergeant now, so he's been in the Army for a while. He certainly isn't a newly enlisted friend, but they've grown up together, and you almost get a big brother type sense about Bucky. He looks after the little guy and understands that he has been trying to lie to get into the Army. Also wants to protect Steve enough to say, stop trying.
And he doesn't, it's interesting because he carries some of the same values, but Bucky doesn't seem as interested in serving his country, at least not for the same reasons that Steve Rogers seems to want this. There's this sense that Bucky feels very proud of serving, but it is almost as if he doesn't really see it as that important. It's just something that he does. Yeah,
it might be something that he's supposed to do. It's in some way an obligation. It's what you do if you're able, but there's also this sense that he looks really good in a uniform and he knows it. And what girl doesn't love a man in a uniform? He's very much, he's not a womanizer in this, but he likes ladies. He's a ladies' man for sure. To the point that when he doesn't necessarily hit on Peggy in a moment where they're going to ship out, and Peggy arrives in a beautiful dress to this dance hall, and specifically wants to speak to Steve, she talks about needing the right partner to dance with, implying that it's not you, Bucky. And Bucky comes right out and says, I'm invisible. I've become you. And this is a joke, but it's also a little hurtful to his pride, because this is what he does. And so I really appreciate what they have done with this character. Again, how closely he resembles all the different incarnations of Bucky Barnes in the comics, our listeners will have to let us know. But it is his death that is one more trauma in the life of Steve Rogers. Talk a little bit about that, Drea. Like, what do you see? Or is this just your standard movie where the best bud has to die, has to be fridged, in order for the protagonist to carry on?
The important takeaway from Bucky's death seems to be, well, of course, it's a huge moment. It's disappointing. It's sad. They're on this fast moving train and he falls to his death, presumably, and is lost in the ice.
Yeah.
Now, Captain America definitely takes responsibility for Bucky's death. He somehow believes that he could have acted differently. He could have tried harder. He could have said something. He could use his superpowers as what he thinks of 100 different things that he could have done differently to save his friend's life. And that reaction is incredibly common. You don't have to be in an experiment or have super serum to feel responsible for a friend's death, or to feel as though there are many things you could have done to have changed the path of that tragedy. Some of those thoughts could be realistic. Some of those thoughts are fantasy.
Yeah.
Down to the inane idea of, like, what if I had slept in or woken up earlier that day? Would it have changed the course of events slightly?
Yeah.
So those ideas are really common when it comes to grief. What I'd say, though, is that Peggy is the one who helps reframe that grief, or that the way to process that grief, by saying that, Bucky was just as much a part of that situation and that moment. You weren't the only person present.
Yeah.
He also, he chose to be in this really risky situation.
Yeah.
He chose to be alongside you. He made choices too.
Right.
And I don't think she's saying that he suicided or that he was reckless. I think what she was saying is that you cannot be the only holder of this sadness and grief. Like, you can't hold the responsibility of this person's death.
Yeah.
And you owe it to yourself to be a little bit more forgiving of your involvement in this. And he takes that life lesson or death lesson.
Yeah.
Because later, when he's
Doing the exact same thing.
yeah, he's realizing as he's piloting this giant plane with bombs on its way to the States, on its way to New York, in fact,
Yeah.
that he has to take the plane down and sacrifice his life in order to save hundreds of thousands of, if not more, other people.
Yeah.
And I think that lesson is what helps him do that. He realizes, this is my choice.
Right.
No one is forcing me to do this. I'm not doing this for the glory. I'm not doing this because it's even the right thing to do. I'm doing this because it feels right to me.
Yeah. Let's talk about the fact that he is then put into ice. He thinks he's sacrificing himself. The plane ends up freezing and preserving him perfectly, basically in carbonite. And he is thawed out 70 years later in New York. He meets, at the end of this film, he meets none other than Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. and is told that, look, you've been frozen for 70 years. The world has changed. Things are different. And we get this look of forlorn Steve Rogers as he realizes he missed his date with Peggy, the love of the potential love of his life. Now, in no way would I expect you to be able to adequately analyze someone with this perfect set of circumstances to get us to this moment, but certainly there have been people who have come out of comas and their entire lives have changed. Mm-hmm. What do you think Steve is going through in those moments?
Yeah, it's a huge impact. One is the recovery piece, mm-hmm. And that's emotionally and physically. How are you recovering from the actual injury, the actual trauma itself? Mm-hmm. And that could take some time and involve therapy and other forms of adjusting. In this case, it's almost like a complete reentry into society. So it's those dual ideas. It's one, grasp and understand that you are alive, but in a completely different social context, mm-hmm. in a completely different time.
Yeah.
And the other piece is, now how do you connect your sense of self to where you are? What makes you you? Which really connects us to this whole idea, like what this movie is about. And it's why I love that this happens to him. Doesn't matter if it's Nazis or aliens or any other threat.
Robots.
Or robots.
Yeah.
Nice callback to Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yeah. Or in our case, it's a call forward.
Call forward.
Yeah.
That's what's really lovely about this story. It's tragic because the love story has been disrupted. You know, that is a tragedy. The bigger story here for me is, so then who the heck are you? Yeah. Was it really about punching Nazis?
Yeah.
It was fundamentally about equity and justice and fairness and protecting. And so how are you going to do that now? Mm-hmm. And so if I link this to what we can take away from it, I think this whole movie is about, who are you? How do you see yourself? This is considered your self-image. Mm-hmm. And then how do you see your ideal self? Psychologists call it simply your ideal self, what you would like to be.
Yeah.
We will never have 100% overlap. The person I would like to be is an ideal that we never really attain that, but it's really healthy to entertain that. What attributes do they have? What are they doing? What is important to them? What are their values? And the reason why this exercise is valuable to us is that when there is more incongruence, when the person you are and your ideal self are very misaligned, or there's this huge gap, that gives us difficulties. That is where we'd say there's not a lot of congruence, mm-hmm. and we want to really explore what's going on. Mm-hmm. In Steve Rogers' case, it was literally, you are being kept from serving in the military because you're not meeting this criteria.
Yeah.
You aren't able to do the thing that you want to do. We all have a version of this. And when we should explore that gap, what is keeping me from being my ideal self? When your self-image and your ideal self are quite close, mm-hmm. Maybe there's healthy overlap there, you can self-actualize. You can feel happy. You can feel fulfilled. You can feel accomplished. You feel like you have a purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm talking in a lot of vague terms, but I hope that people have a sense of urgency around this. Like, oh, what's missing here? How can I create a little bit more overlap? Just align little by little, mm-hmm. to get closer to my ideal self.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of this movie for me.
Yeah, and something that you just said even made me think, just metaphorically, in the same way, it's not just who am I, it's can I remain myself regardless of the environment around me. So when
Yeah.
he's skinny Steve, can he remain good Steve when his body becomes that of not the literal Hulk, but this hunk character? Can he maintain his sense of self within this new body where he can basically have anything he's ever wanted? Can he remain himself when he is put into a situation where he has to potentially kill adversaries to protect the world? Can he remain himself when he wakes up from a coma and realizes 70 years have gone by and he's got a whole new mission, and that the government is not the same government that he once worked for? Can Captain America continue to be Steve Rogers through it all? And I like that we'll be able to see more going forward.
I feel you're right. I feel like I've discovered why so many people, so many of our friends too, love Captain America. Absolutely love him, adore him, feel that he is probably the best Avenger. And in the past, I kept scratching my head about this. Like, why? Why is he so adored?
Yeah.
And I think it's what you just said. It's what we all want to be. Yes, there's this ideal figure that is a part of this, but ultimately the real characteristic that people are embracing is the sense of consistency. There ain't no games here. There's no games.
Yeah.
Like, he is who he is. And that is very attractive. Like, that's just very appealing. Somebody who is completely convinced and unwavering and true. That's incredible. So I really am so glad we rewatched this film, and that I was able to gain a sense of maybe what other people got from the very beginning 10 years ago. This real acknowledgement of not just who this character is, but how we can kind of like gain a little bit of that authenticity from him.
Yeah. I'm very happy to have watched this movie too. Like I said, it's one of those that I don't necessarily go back to a lot. And I think it's because I enjoy story, and I enjoy story that is prolonged over the course of several films. And of course, this is an origin story where we don't necessarily get a piece of the bigger story. I mean, you do get a piece of the bigger story with the Tesseract, but I kind of want each of my movies to be episodic. I want them to all be telling the same story, and this is sort of an origin that I'm glad we looked back on. Drea, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you online?
They can find me online on my website, drdreapsychology.com, and in social media. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram using the identity at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. And you can come follow us on Facebook and join us on Patreon, because next time, as I hinted earlier this week, we are going to do something pretty cool. You are going to be able to watch us watching The Avengers. We're going to put the entire reaction video up on Patreon. That will be exclusive to our patrons. So come join Patreon and join the video podcast tier, and you will be able to watch us watch The Avengers for the first time in a really long time. It's been a while since I've seen The Avengers, I think. So until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
Where we going?
Future.